Ruffy, I had it repainted about 3 years ago and finally got around to reassembling it this year. It's got rear suspension, a little bit of rear suspension here from this rear fork tube goes up inside the frame tube, and then there's a bolt that goes through. So when you go over bumps, it compresses this rubber donut here. The rubber donut really needs replacing, but I've emailed the factory in Germany. They still make the bikes, but they haven't gotten back to me about replacement parts. The front wheel drive, it's pretty cool the way it works. Just goes over this pulley and then down parallel to the fork leg. So when you turn, the chain twists, but it doesn't derail. And you can turn up to about 30 degrees either direction. The chain never comes off because it's under tension. And the slack side, of course, isn't any problem. It's a very fast bike. It's a lot of fun to ride. And then, any questions on that one? And move on to the next one.
So what's the advantage? So it's a front wheel drive bicycle.
Mm-hmm.
And is it just to be different, or is it got, because it's got cargo space in the back kind of, or like sort of a recumbent, or what's the?
You don't pop a wheel if you're accelerating really fast.
There it is.
In fact, it's actually, it's got the typical problem of going up hills that front wheel drives have. If you go up a real steep hill, it'll slip out in the front, but it handles extremely well. I think because you have the weight, I think you get a little better weight distribution than on a regular short wheelbase bike where we've got more weight in the back. So, and then especially with a little bit of weight on the rack and back, handles real well. And I've also ridden it on long tours. Did a couple 100 miles on a weekend with it. It's just, it's really simple too. There's, all there is going to the back wheel is a brake cable. You don't have to deal with shifting, long shift cables and stuff like that. All the cables run right down the fork except for the rear brake.
I would bet on that rear donut that you're looking for. A sway bar end link for a car would have a very similar size chunk of rubber. And you can usually get sway bar end links in all sorts of different diameters and sizes.
Probably a metric too, huh?
Who knows? But yeah, anyway, that would be a way to get a thing that would probably work just fine on there.
Yeah, and it's, I don't know, it's 30 years old. It's getting a little bit hard, yeah. And then the big project that I'm trying to get done soon before the snow gets too much deeper is my four-wheeler. I'm putting a body on it. Got knocked around a little bit here in the basement, but this is, I'm just mocking the body up in cardboard. Last month I showed some fantastic sketches of this with a really nice curvy looking body. I decided I'm just going to go with something simple that's quick to make, and it hasn't been that quick either. I'm going to, and then also everything gets simpler when you get in the world, or you try to make everything simpler when you go from the drawing board to the real world. And so what I was going to do was fix the fairing, fix the whole body to the frame, and then have the front come out on drawer slides. So you just step in around it. I think what I'll do instead is just pivot the whole body in one piece and in the back by the wheels. So you can just lift it, get in, drop the top down on yourself, clamp it to the frame tubes here, and away you go. I've made a couple of paper models, but I forgot to bring them down. Any questions on that?
Is it four-wheel drive?
No, but it's independent two-wheel drive.
All right, I'll give you that.
which is really helpful. And it's
yeah, the one-wheel drive is pretty typical on bicycles. You know what I mean, for rears, because it's easy to do. So if nobody's ever taken a close look at a trike, they're usually one-wheel drive. They're not actually two-wheel rear-wheel drive.
Yeah. So on this one, the standard version comes with one-wheel drive, but the guy I bought it from ordered it with two, and all that is a free wheel on either side. So it's so it is by default a limited. I think that's a limited slip. You're always driving the wheel that has traction. Yeah, good question.
So when are you going to get the body done, Nick? You got enough cardboard there. Just hammer that thing out. Duct tape.
It's a little trickier trying to work in this space instead of someplace a reasonable space like the shop. I have to bring 4x8 foot sheets of coroplast down here, and I'm not sure I have a 4x8 foot space on the floor to cut them.
Well, like I said, if you get it sorted out, you can use the car bay, but you can't live here though. That's the only catch, because I'm sure Eric will be in to work on a car the next day or something. That's how it's been going.
I may be doing that. I'll see what I can do here. I also couldn't get into my garage over the weekend because I use a neighbor's garage to store my coroplast and some of my bikes, and somebody parked there over the holiday. So
this is Mark. I was looking forward to the shot of all the bikes, but I presume that's just a percentage of the bikes.
Yeah, well, I can show you some of the ones that are hanging up there. That's there's 4 bikes over there, 5, 6 here. The Velomobile, the Tandem, the Tour Easy are down in the garage, and Jane's commuter bike is out in the shed.
I don't know if bikes have the same rule as guitars, but I have a friend who has a collection of guitars, and he makes a point of never having them all in the same room at the same time. So it's actually impossible to know exactly how many guitars he has, and he won't say a number.
That would be a problem if Jane didn't have bikes too.
Yes.
I have a question. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I was briefly considering a Velomobile for a commute, but what really put me off of it was the fear that such a unique bike would be stolen or otherwise messed with while I was at work. What do you use to keep your bikes locked up? Do you commute with the bikes, and are they left outside in public view for a long time?
Well, it's been a while since I commuted anywhere, but I do leave them out in public view. There is no problem. As long as I'm the guy on that thing, everybody knows whose it is. Today I went hiking at Cherokee Marsh, and I just left it parked behind a building, unlocked. I usually put a cover on it. That'll keep honest people out. And only once or twice I've had somebody, take the top off and actually poke around inside of it. So it's not usually a problem. What I have for a brake, on the brake lever on the handlebars, you can put, those old spoke locks for bikes, the long U thing going through it. I just put that over the brake lever on the handlebars, and that's a brake lock. When I first got the thing, that's what I was doing. It is a $6,000 item, so I'm concerned about it, but it's unique enough that nobody takes it. Where do you live, in Boston?
Well, if I commuted, I'd commute to the university, where I worry that drunk students would take too much interest in the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good if you can find a secure indoor place to keep it, or at least someplace away from prying eyes.
You got to get a fake motorcycle cover. It makes it look like a motorcycle that's covered up. You just need the upper stem and the handlebars and the seat and everything. It'll just totally blend in.
That's actually one thing that I have. I usually leave that on it when I park it overnight, which is, both for weather protection and for people won't bother it if they can't see it. That's basically the deal.
All right. Well, thank you, Nick. I think we're going to learn about tofu from Shira now.
Yeah, and if you have any other questions about Velomobiles, I'm happy to talk about them. Probably happier than you are to listen.
Thank you, Nick.
You bet.
All right. So I'll try to skip through the middle part. It's a bit long otherwise. This is about trying and sometimes succeeding and sometimes failing to make tofu. So let me move my Zoom so I can see everyone. Just some semblance of human interaction here. All right. So why make tofu? I guess Scott is a vegetarian, and so this is a half vegetarian household. We eat a lot of tofu. Tofu is cheap though, and it's easy to get, but during the pandemic, there's this feeling of wanting to be able to store dry goods and be able to make fresh food out of dry goods, you know, even if, say, like the grocery store is all, I don't know, it's just a theme. I'm not seriously concerned about having to do that. I was interested in finding out if I could. So with tofu, you start typically with dried soybeans, which you could keep for pretty much ever if you store them correctly in your pantry, and then you turn them into fresh tofu, which has a really limited shelf life. But basically I was looking for holiday gift ideas, and I saw some like Reddit post, and they're like, you can make tofu, get someone a tofu press. And I'm like, all right, I'll get Scott a tofu press, and then I'll make, you know, tofu for both of us. So I just Googled like the first top 4 recipes, and they were all more or less the same, but there were some major significant, like there were some major differences between them. And from that, I deduced that maybe it didn't really matter exactly how I did it, so long as I stuck to more or less the basic concept. So I started by soaking the soybeans. They recommend 8 hours. I thought I was going to do it for a day, and then I forgot about it. So it was 2 days. And I blended the beans in the blender. One of the recipes said I had to boil that, and I was like, that's a lot of boiling. So I just strained that and then boiled that, which basically you're making soy milk. So after you mash it up in the blender with some water, you strain it through. Well, I thought I was going to use a strainer, but that was not going to happen. I poured it in, and then immediately it clogged. So I used the cheesecloth, and then I'm like milking the cheesecloth, and then eventually I get some soy milk out of that, boil that, make a huge mess in the kitchen. There's bits of soy milk everywhere. So like it comes out of the cheesecloth, like sprays in every direction. There's little white dots on all of my clothes, on this jacket. And then I boiled that. As I was boiling it, a ton of foam showed up. I didn't think much about it. The recipes mentioned I should skim it off, so I did. But later on, I think there's some significance to the foam that I'm not understanding, but it is the key missing part of this puzzle in my mind. So I used rice vinegar because that's what I had as a coagulant. And basically some of the instructions said one thing, some said another, but I went with the method, bring it to a boil, take it off the heat, put in the coagulant, and immediately large curds formed. The day before I made paneer, which is basically the same thing. You boil milk instead, and then you put, I put lemon juice in, and I had the exact same experience. So it was kind of what I expected to happen. Poured that into the mold covered with a cheesecloth and put some weights on it. These weights are from a physics classroom that they were throwing away. I can't even explain how many weights they were throwing away, and the hoarder in me wouldn't let anyone throw them away. So I stacked them all in the makerspace, and the students all made fun of me. Like, what are these weights for? They made a meme about it. They're like, would you like a weight? And they're like, thanks. I don't know what to do with this. But anyway, yeah. So every time I find a use for these weights, I'm just like so proud. So these are now my tofu weights. And
that you said
yep.
that those were weights because it looked like a PS3.
Oh, does it look like a PS3? The Corningware with the plastic and the, interesting.
The black at the top.
Okay, I see.
Any opportunity Dennis can use for Sony marketing, he takes advantage of. So you gotta take what you can get here.
All right. I think I'll have to go Google that later. I don't see it. Anyway, the result was a really excellent firm tofu. And from that, I concluded that making tofu was quite easy and I was going to do it a lot. But that the only improvement to be made was maybe to reduce the amount of mess while straining this mixture into making soy milk. So I thought, well, maybe I'll have some luck with a soy milk making machine because this thing is designed to do this, right? So it'll produce a soy milk that's easy to use and easy to strain. Basically, it's an immersion blender and a cooking pot, and it does some kind of pre-programmed routine of blending and cooking. It takes about 40 minutes. The machine can only run like 2 batches at a time before it needs a cool down period, and it has a temperature sensor, so it extends the run if it senses it's starting hot. And so I gave that a try, and interestingly enough, the next couple of tries were all with this machine, and I could not make good tofu. Basically, when I and I'll skip some of the things here. I would not get any foam, which didn't concern me because you don't need the foam. You're supposed to skim the foam off. But when I put in the rice vinegar, it didn't coagulate immediately. And when I waited or added more rice vinegar, all I got was really small curds, and the yield felt really low, like the amount of liquid to the amount of tofu. And the mouthfeel was distinctly grainy. And the addition of the extra rice vinegar, at some point it's just to flavor the tofu. And I think washing it to get the flavor out, which one website recommended, kind of makes it even grainier, and it didn't hold together. This is the second batch, so it kind of did hold, but not that well. The third batch, was a total failure. So I stopped taking photos. I was not trying to do this scientifically. I was just trying to make tofu. I got very discouraged. You know, I ran out of rice vinegar at some point because I was pouring so much of it into this thing to try to make it coagulate. And the third one became tofu scramble. So it just like didn't work at all in terms of holding its shape. The fourth one, I had bought some black soybeans, which turn into a purple soy milk just on a whim. And I thought maybe I was making the soy milk too thin because the machine recommends a really like small amount of beans to water. So I made it much thicker, and luckily it hasn't overboiled yet. Rather, you're not supposed to put too many more beans in because at some point the thing will boil over, and then the boil over sensor will tell you that it had to abort the cycle. But you know, it also wasn't any easier to strain this mixture. Like it's just the stuff is like a weird porridgey flour, and it ends up like absorbing liquid, and it makes it really difficult to strain. Because while the sediment itself is really thin and small, it somehow holds onto water in a way that clumps really, unfortunately. So I made this purple tofu and I threw that away because it was so grainy and so crumbly that it just was sad. So I needed to win somewhere. So I made purple soy milk and I flavored it with honey and cinnamon and cloves because I figured, you know, life gives you lemons. If you have a soy milk maker, just make soy milk for drinking. Stop trying to make tofu for a moment. And it was really, really good. It's like a thick, porridgey, sweet meal. Like, it's really like not something you would add to like, I mean, when I added all the honey to it, it wasn't like a, you know, soy milk for coffee. It was like soy milk for drinking as a beverage on its own. So I have this leftover strain, the byproduct of the straining, okara, and I don't know what to do with it because I'm not gonna like, I mean, you could use it as filler for all kinds of ingredients, but most people feed it to livestock because I suspect the world produces just way much more of it than anyone wants to eat. If you want to increase its shelf life, you can dehydrate or bake it and essentially turn it into a flour. And you can buy that flour from like a lot of Asian groceries, but basically like most of it just gets fed to like cows and pigs. So I fed it to my worm bin. I have a vermicomposting setup and they love this stuff. In the photo is actually another experiment. I've tried to make oat milk and I never will try to make oat milk again, but whether it's like oat pulp or soy pulp, the worms really love it. Oat milk, by the way, is one of those things that is better with all the stabilizers they add to it in the supermarket. It is really not good without those stabilizers. So I wouldn't recommend trying to make oat milk. It's just slimy and gross. Yeah, depending on how much you dehydrate it, it kind of has anywhere from a flour to a porridge look when you're done, you know, with the straining process. So tofu attempt number 5, I said I have to go back to basics and ditch the Soya Joy machine and just try to use the blender again to see if I could just learn anything or just rehash my success from the first round. So by then though, my gypsum or calcium sulfate had arrived. So I thought, let's try something that's not rice vinegar. I haven't been able to find the really big containers of rice vinegar anymore at the grocery store. So I'm still out of that. I didn't blend, actually. I didn't do the blending part on the first step. Scott did it and I didn't realize, but he had a technique, basically just blended a lot more and I didn't blend it enough in this round. So the yield was really poor because I strained most of the soybean pulp out. I also noticed that a couple recipes said to let it sit. Now I was like convinced based on the results of the first round that if it was going to be done correctly, if it was done correctly, all of the large curds would form immediately and there was no point in waiting. But some of the recipes kind of convinced me to try letting the mixture sit undisturbed for 15 or so minutes and seeing if it would gel a little more. And indeed it does. Like it kind of creates a flan shape type thing and you turn the pot and the whole thing kind of keeps its circular shape and it floats downward. So this batch of tofu worked out. So then I also got some nigari, which is like a byproduct of, or it's like a product of drying salt water, seawater. It's magnesium chloride. And for this one, I did a better job with the blending, really getting it to a smooth and creamy puree. And then I you know, in the process of using different strainers and cheesecloth and breaking some cheesecloth and just, I think the best method that really comes out of all of this experimentation is let it sit. You basically let it sit until it settles and then you pour the top off. And as soon as the strainer clogs, you're done pouring. The rest of it, throw that away. I can't really find another like method that isn't work intensive. And also when you strain it with force, like through a cheesecloth, I swear you're forcing a lot of the solids through the mesh. So it's not like good to push too hard because the sediment, it's like really fine, but it clumps into larger, I don't really know the words I'm looking for. It has a weird property. It's like a porridge. So this was also pretty good tofu, and I now really wanted to actually today find out if I could make tofu with the soy milk maker at all, given everything I learned. So I made 3 batches in the machine and collected all of it into a container, let it settle overnight, poured it out, made the whole mess in the kitchen again, the porridge, the soy milk, boiled it, and then I tried 1 batch with the nigari coagulant and 1 batch with the gypsum coagulant. And you can see after letting it sit for 20 minutes or so, the amber colored liquid really separates from the curds, but the curds are very small. So I put those into some molds, and I haven't eaten it yet, so I don't know how it is, but I did kind of peek at it after a couple of hours and taste some of the crumbles. The nigari one has a really distinct flavor. The nigari, I don't know, it's bitter. I find it kind of more sweet than bitter, but it definitely has flavor, and you don't really want that in your tofu. I mean, if you cook it with certain marinades, you won't notice, but with other ones, it'll clash. So it's probably not a desired thing. The gypsum one, it does not have any flavor, but the mouthfeel, and we'll see if it, changes over time with more pressing, but the mouthfeel is very like instant potatoes. It's almost like paste. So I don't think that's what I'm looking for, but the thing that this taught me, the really important thing, is that there's no foam that forms when I boil the soy milk from the soy milk maker. So that's interesting. I don't think the foam is just incorporated air that's being caused by the blender. There's something in the soy milk, I think, that's being like denatured in the process of the slow 40-minute cook cycle in the machine, because the foam really accumulates with the cold blended one that is then strained. As you cook it, like a lot of foam shows up as the heat of the temperature of the mixture goes up. And that doesn't happen for the soy milk machine made soy milk. Yeah, it's just, I think there's a hint there about something, but I don't know what it is yet. So if I have to guess, what are the important dimensions of soy milk making, or sorry, of tofu making? I think that the composition of the soy milk is probably really important. I think you can control that with your beans to water. You probably can't really control your beans. The assumption is the only beans you can source are basically dried soybeans. Maybe you can get fresh, I don't know. But assuming that, then you can modify your beans to water ratio. You can change your method of making the soy milk, which I have no clue how that affects it, but definitely seems to. And then how you filter your soy milk probably has a huge effect. And I'd be curious to know, what if I just don't filter it at all? What happens then if I let like the sediment sit, or if I let much of the sediment sit and filter it just once through a really coarse strainer? And then of course the type of coagulant and how much you use are going to affect it a lot. I don't think that soaking the beans for different amounts of times really matters, so long as you soak them enough and they don't start to rot. I also don't think that like it's that important how much time it spends at a boil or at a simmer, even though a lot of people like talk about it. Everyone's got a different, like instruction set, so I'm not actually sure that we really know what's going on there. And then I think when you have to let it settle after you added the coagulant, I think so long as it has like had some time for some reaction to happen, there's no harm to waiting longer, except that it's sitting there at room temperature or higher. And I don't think that you're like really going to get, it's like diminishing returns at some point. So I guess my hypothesis is that, yeah, something about the foam is important, that I want extra firm tofu, so I want large curds to form immediately. That if I wanted silken tofu, which is like a very different tofu, like almost like a flan, like a tofu pudding, which really has like a jello consistency, then I'd probably actually want small curds and a very finely filtered soy milk, and actually a completely different coagulant called GDL. So I've got some experiments planned for the future. Meanwhile, I'm just making a tofu every couple of days. Some of it's really bad, some of it's really good. All right, that's the presentation. Any questions? Yeah.
Your jump to soy milk, that was kind of voluntary, right? There was no data that you read or anything that suggested that using actual soy milk from the soy milk maker was going to make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, people said you can buy the soy milk maker for making tofu. Like that's one of the things you can do with it.
Is that much different? I know I eat a lot of tofu, but I've never tried to make it. Is that any different than like whatever soy milk product you can buy like at the grocery store?
So the grocery store soy milk is going to have the same like stabilizers that they'll need to put in anything to keep it like, I don't know, shelves. It has to have a longer shelf life. In the fridge, I think without any additives, it's probably only a couple of days before it's not really good anymore.
Cool.
And they usually sweeten it.
Huh?
Oh, they often sweeten and flavor it, though you can obviously find unsweetened, unflavored.
All right.
So the next thing is to maybe look into how factories do it, because I think how factories do it would shed a lot of light. Plus, the silken tofu at the Mom's House Chinese market near me, that doesn't feel like it's imported from very far away. That feels like it's got to be made somewhere close by because of the packaging and the way that it looks, and how like delicate it is. So maybe I just have to track them down and ask them how they do it.
Sean, were you gonna ask something?
Yeah, so did you, in terms of the three coagulants you used, the vinegar and the two different salts, did you see a major difference? Because I've never used the vinegar technique. I mean, I've made a lot of cheese and I've made some tofu, but I was curious. I've had luck with nigari, but not tried the vinegar.
So the rice vinegar one was the batch we liked the most. That first batch was the best batch of all of them. The flavor of the rice vinegar, though, you can definitely notice it. The nigari definitely has a flavor that you can notice as well. The nigari is a crystal, so when you actually dissolve it in some water prior to actually adding it to the soy milk, it turns completely clear when it's completely mixed in. But the gypsum is like a powder, and it falls out of the solution really fast. Like you just end up with like a cloudy mixture that then has like a sediment at the bottom. But it seems to have the mildest flavor. So that's all I know so far, but more experiments are required.
But the largest curd was formed by the vinegar of your three?
Yes, but keep in mind that my very unscientific process, like I don't keep track of half the variables, and you know, who knows what really happened, right? In one of these trials, I tried to make a double batch in a stock pot, and the whole system was cooling so quickly I could hardly even bring it to a boil. Like I just didn't account for how much, you know, thermal dissipation to the environment was going to happen.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions?
So the gypsum as a coagulant, that's like the gypsum that you would find in plaster or something like that?
Yeah, apparently it's plaster of Paris.
Maybe that's where your extra
That's
firm
fascinating.
tofu comes from. You know, you just put enough gypsum in there. Anybody else have any questions for
I'm
Shira?
going to press end share screen if I can find where that button went.
Bottom, or I can kill it. There you
Thanks.
go, fixed. I have limited powers. Awesome. Well, thank you, Shira.
No problem.
Yay.
Well, you know, if you hit the farm field, you can probably get some fresh soybeans during the summer, as many as you can pick.
There's definitely one farm that does grow them. Yeah.
As many as you can pick before you get caught.
You got to get like a deer costume or something so you can just go out in the field. All right, Dennis, you want to take it away?
Yeah, can you hear me? All right, let me flip the camera around. So a while back, I don't know, maybe a year ago, I bought this lightfield display. And what I mean by lightfield display is your typical display, like your LCD panel. Each pixel sends light out in all directions. But with this display, it has very directional light. And so my wife loaned me a nice little Lazy Susan here. But if I rotate this around, you've actually got parallax on that image because it's sending out about 45 different views of light using a lenticular kind of magic inside. This is a 8-inch display. It uses a 2K by 1600 display. They had a 16-inch display that uses a 4K. And now they have a new portrait style one that's coming out too. That's kind of this same resolution, but vertical. And the problem with this is you need a pretty hefty PC to drive it, something with a pretty high-end GPU. And, you know, a laptop sitting next to this makes it like twice as big, plus the fan is spinning. And I just wanted a little art display that I could have sitting on a shelf or something like that. So the Raspberry Pi 3 didn't have enough oomph to do something like this, but when the Raspberry Pi 4 got announced, which can drive up to a 4K display, I thought, well, that would really do it. So I bought one of those and then didn't really get to it. A couple months ago, these guys announced their portrait style one that has an integrated Raspberry Pi 4, and that kind of spurred me to finishing this project. So I captured a bunch of images while it was hooked up to the PC as essentially PNGs, and then made a Raspberry Pi 4 mount on the back that hooks up to the HDMI input and just drives slides to this thing using a off-the-shelf slide viewer. So now basically it plugs in and it makes pretty pictures. It's fanless, it makes no noise, there's no extra space involved, and it can just sit there going through some images. These are all from other people's projects, but they actually have a really nice little app. If you shoot a picture using portrait mode on your iPhone, or I think some new Google phones have the depth camera in it, it'll actually make you a nice little lightfield image. They call it holographic image. It's not really using holography. There's no light interference type of thing going on. It's all lenticular magic.
So can
This
you
is just
comment
stills,
on
but
what that
what's that?
lenticular, can you comment on what the lenticular magic is for those of us who haven't seen one of these guys before?
Well, if you remember the little Cracker Jack things where you would get the little, it's like a piece of cardboard with this plastic lens over it. You could run your fingernail over it and hear the noise in one direction, but not the other direction. It's essentially a micro lens array with vertical lenses. And whatever underlining media is under that, it kind of selects a vertical column of that and sprays it out in one direction. And so if you think of the pixels as the LCD display as now being that media with this micro lens array over the top of it, the individual little RGB subpixels that make up the pixels are actually being sprayed out in all different directions. It's a little bit trickier than that because if it was perfectly vertically aligned with the screen, you wouldn't get very many views at all. So it's actually purposely rotated a little bit. There's no way you're going to be able to see it on the phone, but there's some hints that there's a small amount of rotation in there. As a separate project, I actually reverse engineered the optics of this because I had to know how it worked. And so I was like turning on individual subpixels and seeing which direction they sprayed until I was able to write some software that essentially could create a lenticular image for this. So I have a stacked disk thing that was all calculated without their SDK or anything like that, but it's not real time or anything like that. These guys have a real-time SDK. It plugs into Unity and Unreal, so you can make games or movies or things like that. And with more time, the Raspberry Pi could potentially display some movies on this rather than just still images. But I was happy to have it just as a still image viewer. So that project, any questions on that?
What are you saying is the limit on being able to show motion?
The compute power, really. The multi-view movies can be stored essentially in a regular movie format as a tile. Like if you have 45 tiles arranged like in a 5x9 matrix, each representing a different view, that's 45 views. And then you need a full screen pixel shader essentially that converts that into this magical lenticular format. So I think that could actually run on a Raspberry Pi 4. So this could show holographic movies or 3D movies, but I just haven't done the work to make it a movie player. It's just a picture player at this point. The commercial portrait one that they just did a Kickstarter on, that'll do movies as well as pictures. And then, of course, if it's hooked up to a PC running the full SDK or the Unreal, integration, you can actually have, actual real-time animated 3D scenes that this is rendering. So part of their marketing is that you would use this as an external display if you're a content creator or something like that. I think the downfall, and maybe it's hard to see with streaming video and I can't really zoom into it, is it's actually not huge resolution. Like you can see a little bit of jagginess on the side of that image. It's not HD resolution by any stretch. It's kind of, in a way, a VGA per view kind of thing, because the lenticular micro lens is essentially dividing up the millions of subpixels here across 45 views. So the effective resolution per view is about VGA.
Would that be useful for flight simulation? Would it give you a more realistic view?
Yeah, if it was bigger. They do have, this is the 8-inch, so they have a 16-inch, which would take it out to here. And then they have a 32-inch that would be, you know, almost TV size. And the cool thing about these is they're all multi-viewer. After I got this, actually, Sony announced a thing they call spatial reality display, which uses a different type of micro lens that allows it to be higher resolution, but it's single viewer. It has a high-speed camera that actually tracks your eyes and renders the views in real time to compensate for where you are. And so it's higher resolution, but single viewer, whereas this is multi-viewer, but lower resolution.
Shira's got a
Question,
question
you,
for
you mentioned 45 different view angles. How are those distributed across what kind of cone?
The 45 is kind of an interesting number. And when I was trying to reverse engineer this, I had that in my head it was like a real number, but it's actually not true at all. Because of the way this lenticular lays over the pixels, I had it in my head that it was just like super precisely aligned by, you know, technicians in order to perfectly exactly cover the pixels in some clever way that was an integer. And I could just not reverse engineer it at all. And then I slept on it and I woke up and realized that you can't precisely align something like that. It's just not even going to be possible. And so I kind of started over and said, what if you just laid it on there and then calculated like the actual per device calibration parameters so that each RGB subpixel is effectively sprayed out at some angle, but you can calculate this angle by calibrating the display. And by the end of the day, it turns out that's what it was doing. So if you're running a shader, you essentially take the subpixel coordinate and you calculate an angle, and that's your view. So there's actually an infinite number of views, but in practical terms, if you provide more than about 45 or 50 actual views, you can't distinguish that. So that's why these tiled quilted images, they kind of limit those to about 45 because having more than that is just a waste.
So nonetheless, what is the min and max viewing angle as you turn this disc back and forth? You know, at what point?
Yeah, if you turn too far, it'll start flipping. Like there, you can see you're walking off the edge. So it's from effectively there to kind of there, and then it starts washing out, right? So you're seeing an alias of that Japanese character there and over there. So yeah, from the side, there's actually nothing. It's just acrylic. The acrylic block is on there. They claim for the refractive index. It kind of gives you a wider field of view than if that wasn't on there. But weirdly, on their new one, they don't have that big, thick acrylic block on there anymore. So they must have solved that somehow. So effective field of view is like from there to there. So what is that? That's about 30-ish degrees maybe.
So if you tilt it forward, are we only options side to side, not like tilting it forward?
That is correct. There's no vertical parallax at all. In fact, if you move your head up and down, it feels like the image is rotating with you. And that's because it's as if it was a real object moving with you, you would have no vertical parallax. And so, yeah, there's nothing. Like as I move here, there's no vertical, but if I move here, you see horizontal parallax.
And that's where you're talking about the new version has, or maybe the Sony version has both axes, both horizontal and vertical following you.
Exactly, because of the eye tracking, if you move your head up here, it renders the object rotated so that, you know, as you move your head around, you've got full horizontal and vertical parallax. That's Mars right there, by the way. That was from actual Mars data. Somebody made a little volumetric model of that.
I think architects are vain enough to be the market for this. You know, they have to show off their architectural creations to their clients, and this is the only time you can really be in there and immersive in a picture format.
Yeah, exactly.
Any product designer, actually.
Yeah, product designer, architect. In fact, I was talking to the US marketing manager for the Sony display, which is a 16-inch, so it's twice as big as this. And we were talking about potential markets, and I'm like, product designers and architects, especially during COVID, if you could mail them a display with a PC that drives it, and then be able to push and update models to it so that people could see them, in 3D before you've ever committed to molds or anything like that. It'd be a lot of fun. This actually is a still, oh, it's gone now, but from a clock. The actual app, they have a little library of apps. When it's running, it's actually ticking off seconds and things like that. But because there's a picture viewer, it's just stationary.
So what's
Is there a fish tank? Sorry.
I was asking, what's the component cost for all this stuff?
So it's just a high-res display. In this case, it's a 2.5K. The fancier one is a 4K panel with that micro lens array, which I'm sure is pretty cheap. This one has this huge block of acrylic on it, but the new one, they've gotten that out. So when this first came out, I think the original Kickstarter, I got this for 600, and it seemed like a pretty good deal. And now, a year and a half or maybe 2 years later, this portrait style one is, the list on it is going to be 350, but the Kickstarter was 200, and they currently still have it listed for 250 or something like that. So they're really bringing the price factor down. The Sony one, I think, because it's bigger, it's a 16-inch display. I think that starts at 5K, but they're marketed a little bit different too, I think.
Is there a fish tank app for it?
There is. I only have a still from it somewhere in this. There's about 200 pictures in here, so I don't know when it'll come around because it's randomized. But yeah, the fish tank one, they just kind of swim around in there. It feels bad on the 8-inch one because they feel confined, but on the bigger one, they look nice. I actually wish I had gotten the bigger one. It was a bit more, but this was a risk. I didn't really know this company, and the videos on, you've done Kickstarter, right? The videos say one thing, but do you really get that in the end? And when this showed up and I connected it up, I'm like, oh my God, I love this. But the downside was the PC sitting next to it, the fan blowing, and it just really wasn't an art thing you could put on the shelf. And so that's why the holiday project was the Raspberry Pi 4.
Not that this is feasible, but to make it more of an art project, you should get one of those floating platforms for it and have it somehow levitate.
Oh, right. Yes. That would be so awesome. It is pretty freaking heavy though. So I don't know if you'd want to be around that kind of flux. So someday when the shops open up again, I'll bring it in and people can look at it with their own eyes.
That micro lens you were talking about, is that similar to like a Fresnel lens or something like that?
It
sounds kind of similar ideas.
Well, let me think. I've got a Fresnel and it has that same sort of texture to it, although it is concentric circles, whereas this is parallel lines. So I think they're produced the same way, but the focal length might be very different, and it's just a parallel line rather than the circles.
That makes sense. Yeah, because it sounded similar ideas of micro lenses all lined up in some way.
Yeah,
Yes.
Fresnel's circular. It's like a magnifying glass pushed flat.
Exactly. And my understanding of the Fresnel is if you took a regular convex lens and just took the surface elements of them and pushed them close together, so the amount of curvature is high near the edge and less near the middle, whereas these micro lenses are equivalent all the way across. Each one of them is, here I am making hand gestures you're not seeing. Each one of them is an equivalent little lump of plastic all the way across, whereas the Fresnel is a little bit flatter out here and a little bit steeper on the edge.
Okay, that makes sense.
There was actually a project at Sector, I believe Brian Vesperman was working on it, of flattening a unidirectional concave lens or convex lens.
Yay, Team Fortress 2.
This guy here is actually the inventor of it, the guy on the right. It's kind of interesting. His dad, I can't keep the picture up, but That picture was taken using a camera on a rail. And so as it moves across the rail, it's taking a whole series of photographs and they get merged together into the multi-view thing. This one's kind of cool too, because it animates as the camera moved. It's a LED cube the guy's holding on his lap. And going back to the picture, the family picture, as the camera moved across the rail, the dad on the left actually had his mouth open and then he closed it partway through. So as you move your views, on the right, the mouth is closed, and on the left, the mouth is open. This one is really sharp. You can see the reflections move and the stuff inside the lenses move.
I feel like this is an expensive adult version of a magic eye.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like VR goggles without having to put stuff on your head, you know?
Yeah, no, totally. It's a very cool effect. The fact that I was wondering how I was going to play through on the camera. And
Only
the effect,
because my wife loaned me this cool thing. Otherwise, I'd be doing this back and forth. Oh, there's Sean, the inventor, too. And so this was also shot on the rail camera. And you can see how the magnifying glass kind of moves. Yeah, if not for the lazy Susan, I'd be doing this with the camera and we'd all be probably getting sick. But
About a motor for that lazy Susan.
yeah. But the nice thing is, if you're just sitting here yourself with two eyes, nothing needs to be moving. You might, move your head back and forth a little bit, but
I disagree. Any opportunity to throw an Arduino at the Raspberry Pi should be taken, Dennis. You should know better.
Oh, so I should put a motor. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I gotta have that. The stepper motor on there to add noise, and you got to work for months making the stepper motor really quiet.
Yes.
Dennis, maybe you mentioned it and I missed it. Is there an app for the phone to take the pictures for this that spaces out sort of like a panorama shot?
So there's two ways to do it. The rail camera is kind of the high-end version of doing it, and that's where you would actually, with a pretty wide field of view, you'd move the camera along the rail. And then for the for the left-hand pictures, you'd use the right. And then as the camera moves along for the left-hand pictures, the right-hand pictures, you'd use the left. Anyway, you'd merge all those together into multi-view. That's with a standard camera. The modern phones that can shoot the cameras that fake the depth of field for the background, so like the iPhone 10 and newer, and then the Google Pixel and all those, they're actually capturing depth information for each photo you take. And you can get that out of the photos, like it's some metadata in there. And so they have an app that'll take the portrait style single photo with depth, and they'll bake a multi-view image out of that. And so you'll be able to essentially take a picture with your phone and be able to view it in 3D like this.
Anybody got a last question for Dennis, or? Otherwise, I feel like you'll have a rapt audience for hours with this thing. All you do is just keep moving it back and forth.
Yeah, my hands get tired, so.
Chris, can I derail for like 10 seconds to ask?
Oh man, what's your bribe?
Well, maybe hundreds and hundreds of dollars, depending on how this conversation works out.
Oh, exciting. All right, go for it.
So I got an email from Thingiverse last night that said that somebody's trying to tip me, but I don't have all that set up. And they want me to set up some accounts. I'm trying to figure out, oops. Or has anybody gotten a tip from somebody on Thingiverse before?
Is this a humble brag, Davey? Are you trying to humble brag about your Thingiverse tip?
I figure out if I'm being built, or more importantly, am I like going to go through hours of work to get 70 cents?
I have never. So I've got some things on Thingiverse. I know Jim's got a bunch of stuff on Thingiverse. I've never had anyone try to tip me, despite having a very loved 3D scanned Grenadier model of the little toy army guy on Thingiverse, but never gotten a tip out of it.
You got to break into the kids' toy market, I guess. I don't know.
Jim, have you ever been tipped on Thingiverse?
No, but I'll give you a tip. Don't count on Thingiverse to retire on.
I was tipped a couple of times on Thingiverse, but I never set it up either. This was years ago.
Oh, there it is. Scott's just leaving money on the table.
Yep.
Nice.
Okay. Well, that didn't help me as much as I wanted, but
how is this going to be hours of work to set up a tip? I mean,
I gotta go figure out my PayPal account from like the early '90s, and then I've got to get that set up, and then I'm gonna get like 73 cents. That's kind of how I expect this ball breakup.
I say absolutely, you should totally do this. It sounds like a good use of your time. Yeah, to earn 73 cents.
Yeah, right. All right. Well,
Dave, remember it's that time of year that tips are taxable.
Oh, good to know.
So it'd actually be like 56 cents after tax.
All right, I'll give you guys a full report next month on how many thousands of dollars I've made.
All right, we'll go back to Underailed. I think Max is up next.
All right. All right, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Cool. So a few months ago, I got brought on by the NFL to do the
Linebacker.
Yeah, I walked on and I'm on the Packers. So I had a colleague that did the first 2 games, and they brought me in, and I've done every game since then at Lambeau. So what they did is they hired someone in every area of where the teams are across the nation to basically act as the crowd, the fans of the team. So they wanted super fans because no matter what, they always want you to cheer for the team at home and boo, or just make sad noises about the incoming team. And I don't know how many people at Sector watch football. Probably not a huge percentage, but I thought, you guys might find this interesting. So they sent us a big kit, and I'll show it to you here. So it's 2 ThinkPads. You see the redundant set up with 2 USB controllers here. And we're running a program here called Wise. I don't know if anybody's familiar. I wasn't beforehand, but it's a video game audio engine. And it's running basically quad audio, 4 microphones of the Lambeau Field crowd at different ambiances. So I'm running on the very first level of ambience here, and I'll turn it up a little bit so you can hear. This is Lambeau. This is Lambeau on level 2. Level 3.
When does Charlie Barron's cut in?
And level 4. And you can see it takes a little while to crossfade. Here, there's different audio files that crossfade intelligently. So most of the time, I'm in the truck, in the broadcast truck, depending on which network it is that week, CBS, Fox, NFL Network. And they've got me, one day I got to be in the field, which was cool, and actually watch the game in person. And basically I respond to each play. So we ramp up depending on how serious the play is. And then there's a peak knob here, which controls the overall crowd just freaking out. And if, say, somebody makes a big catch, we have a medium yes. We've got a big yes. Let's say they're getting a touchdown or something like that. So, yeah, it's a very weird, probably once in a lifetime gig. And it's been a blast. I think I'm done for the season. I was saying before the meeting, the rest of the games for the playoffs are unfortunately Fox broadcasts, and they have a competing system to do the same thing. So I believe that I'm done for the season, but it's been a huge blast. And I just wanted to show you guys. So yeah, does anybody have any questions?
That is super cool, Max. Does it randomly select from different copies of this? So if you do the medium yes, is it always exactly the same medium yes, or is there like 50 different medium yeses it randomizes?
Yeah, I think there's about, I'm not sure. I've seen numbers in the 45s. So I think there's probably around 15 responses on each level, and some of them are not evenly distributed, like in terms of the crowd's response. So some of them are much louder than others, which was a little bit of a challenge sometimes because you're over exaggerating the response or under exaggerating the response to the play.
How early in the season did they start doing this?
From the very beginning.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
I did notice they were definitely playing with levels throughout the season in terms of how much ambient there is, how much crowd simulation there is, and how much you hear the teams. And I guess a positive benefit of COVID is we hear the teams so much more than we ever did before. And we're going to miss that.
I'm going to miss that as well. Yeah. Being in the audio trucks, it was really cool being near, because they have so many mics on the field, on the players and on the cameras and everything. And you can hear so much stuff that never even makes it to broadcast, which is hilarious. All the very colorful language before the game that never makes it to air on field, which is great. Yeah.
I like that Dennis is using they've been playing with the audio noises the whole season, and like Dennis, you're talking to the man who's been playing with the audio the whole season, or at least a number of the games.
The thing is that it's really network dependent. So like 2 games ago, I actually got to be in Lambeau, like watching the game in person. But the game right before that was CBS, and I was in the server room in like the side of the cafeteria with one screen. I wasn't even in the stadium. So, one network will mix me up really loud, and then the other network, people will be like, yeah, we can't hear you at all. So there wasn't that much I could do about the overall volume. I just tried to respond to the plays.
Were you ever tempted to have the crowd kind of irrationally turn against a certain player just because, you could do something like that?
There were a couple times, especially there was a Bears game where the Bears were at the Lambeau Field, and one of the players on the Bears made a touchdown and went for the Lambeau leap.
Yep.
And it was an extreme boo. The audience had the audience had a very negative reaction to that.
That's awesome.
It's interesting. It's one. For some reason in my head, I just assumed this was an aggregation of at least a couple dozen inputs from people, around the country or whatever. So it's actually humbling to hear. It's literally one person.
Yeah, I would assume that it was that way too. And I thought their justification was interesting because I think they could have piped it in from anywhere. But it was probably helpful to be there physically by the truck for one thing. But I think it was really important for them to want the reaction to feel authentic to the team.
And also latency these days, because if you're watching at home, you're on a huge delay compared to real time.
Yep, exactly.
Are the tracks actually sampled from Lambeau, or they are? That's awesome.
They are, yeah. Every team had its own. This is from NFL Films, all the content, and so there's this kind of content that the NFL Films owns. The Madden games also have similar audio. Fox must, because they've got their own system. This audio was done with 4 microphones, and there were a lot of debates around by the TV guys in the truck that either was or wasn't done right, and there were other ways they should have done it, and this and that. But yeah, and they're also putting together. They had sort of like non-denominational crowds too. So because they had, for COVID reasons, they had teams, they had games where neither team in the stadium was the home team. And so they used this kind of generic crowd. I don't know where they recorded that, and I know that they're putting everything that they've done, all of the systems together for the Super Bowl. So there's a giant Super Bowl package being put together that's supposed to be what, the results of everything they've learned through the season.
Wow.
And they recorded
Go ahead.
Did they recorded all this for the pandemic, or they just happen to have all this audio for other reasons?
They had this stuff, and I was a little curious about that myself. I never got a straight answer on what it was for. I'm guessing they do all these documentaries, And I'm guessing that they want to have kind of just straight audio so that even if somebody is like running in slow motion into the end zone through the rain, they can have kind of like a cheer or a boo or something that reacts realistically to that, that's not tied to maybe the original footage that they took.
I think you alluded to like John Madden football. I think the video game market probably drives a fair amount of some of that background noise sampling. So
definitely, yeah. And you know, when we first got the job, I assumed that that's actually where the audio was from some video game. I assumed Madden, and I was surprised to learn that it was from a totally different recording.
So another byproduct to COVID of not hearing much of the crowd in past seasons, I don't know if these are broadcast in surround or if we're just hearing them in surround or what, but in some games, there was this guy we ended up calling the woohoo guy, because during the crowd cheering with the right speaker in the back, you could hear this one guy going, woohoo, like really clearly. It was super annoying. And so during the COVID games, we're like, God, we're so glad we don't have to hear the woohoo guy anymore. And then like on game 6 or something, we were really surprised to hear woo-hoo. And I'm like, oh my God, it's the woo-hoo guy. Where did he come from?
I know exactly the sample you're talking about. And it just actually played in the background very quietly as you were talking.
Oh my God.
So besides obviously being some sort of audio engineer, did you have to like prove your, dedication to the Packers to get this gig, or, what was the kind of interview process?
Only a little bit, I think that they were a little bit desperate to just lock people in for the gig. So I didn't really, I'm a football fan, but I'm not like the biggest Packers fan in the world or the biggest football fan in the world. I enjoy it, like as a strategy of it and everything. There were probably people that are far more qualified than me from like a fan perspective. But yeah, I got the job through a colleague who signed on for the first 3 games, and then it was basically I did have to do a resume and an interview for it, but I think it was basically just through the recommendation of my friend that it came together.
Any other questions from anybody?
So this, the whole like mixing rig you just showed off that you're doing all these crowd sounds with, is that like during? I'm guessing this is during the game, like you said, you're sitting in like a van outside, kind of watching the, okay, this happened or that happened, I should play this or play that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm watching live. The first 4 games that I did, I was in the trucks, the broadcast trucks, either with the graphics people or the sound people who were mixing the on-field mics. And then the 5th game that I did, CBS, who are by far the worst network in the world, apparently, they're just awful. They put me literally in the server room on the side of a cafeteria outside of the stadium with one screen, with one camera feed that didn't show whether or not people made field goals, who was really catching the ball. Like
you have to like stick your ear out to listen to the stadium.
Literally, yeah. And I was actually in there trying to pirate the game 5 minutes before it started so that I could have another angle on what was happening.
I swear this isn't illegal. I'm trying to mix it.
Yeah. So the week after that, though, they brought me back and it was a different crew. And this crew was like completely different. They wanted to help out as much as they could. They got me in the stadium. So I got to be at the 50-yard line in one of the camera suites and actually watch it in person. So that was like the highlight of the season for sure.
That's cool. It's like DJing, but
crowd
sounds essentially.
Yeah, it's like a performance, and I do a little bit of like live electronic music, and yeah, so it is kind of like that. I mean, it's you can see it's not dissimilar to like a electronic DJ, music setup.
You're controlling, I guess, music, but in this case, it's crowd sounds instead of like soundtrack.
Yeah, it's noise. It's noise music, right?
I guess Someone's probably made music out of that.
Yeah.
Or could.
Some part of me really actually does. I need to save this file before I get rid of these computers and send them back, just to have it for posterity.
Yeah, I know a data recovery place, or I work for one.
We gotta
the laptops back.
we gotta
Intact.
mail Dennis the woohoo track, on DVD. So he pops in, he's like, "What is this?" He's like, "Oh God, no."
Max, quick question. Was this strictly for broadcast, or did they put you on the speakers in the stadium as well?
Not on the speakers at all. So yeah, it's relatively quiet on the field, besides the music that they play. And I actually found out just on the final game of the season that I was actually also going to radio, though, because I was under the assumption the whole time that I was just going to TV, but they'd been splitting me off at some point in the routing and sending it to radio as well. But yeah, nothing on the field.
So is this the biggest gig you've ever worked then, having a TV and radio audience?
Multi-millions.
I mean, I did a bunch of Biden ads last year, so that might be technically the biggest thing. But yeah, I think depending on who you're asking, this is the biggest for my girlfriend's grandma. This is the biggest thing I've ever done, and my resume also.
That's awesome.
I have one more question, and you've kind of touched on this, but if you're watching a live feed and then your different channels were taking time to phase in and phase out of the reaction times, and you have multiple cameras that you're looking at, or in one case you had one camera angle, what was your level of accuracy as far as telling what the viewer was seeing and reacting to that compared to like what you could see on monitor 4 that the viewer had no idea happened?
Sure. So there's almost no latency at the stadium in terms of those video feeds. I mean, there's some, but I mean, I'm not aware of what it is, but it's pretty minimal, and it's the same amount of latency that like the announcers are getting, or or the coaches are getting, owners and stuff like that. So it's pretty instantaneous. But at the same time, more than anything, I do is really anticipate the play. So as what they were saying is, and what I tried to do as I went on in the season was, if Aaron Rodgers drops back to throw, and the ball is in the air, the crowd is going to cheer like it's going to be caught until it's not caught. So from the crowd's perspective, you're always looking for like the silver lining, or the rosy perspective of what might happen, and then so you kind of start to cheer before the catch happens, and if it doesn't happen, then they get sad. Basically.
So did you find yourself watching old football games to prepare for this? How did you study for it?
I did, yeah. They gave us all NFL Game Pass membership, which was nice. So I watched like 5 or 6 games from the last season just to prep. Because I think that what surprised me is, obviously you boo and when something's bad, and you cheer when something's good, but I didn't realize how, if the Packers are way up, if the Packers are like 20, 25 points up, and they're just dunking on the other team, the Packers crowd is still just going like nuts wild. Way more than, because that was something I realized kind of like halfway through the season when I started going back to watch some more games, is even when at the end of the game, when they kneel down just to kill time, the crowd goes insane. Like really, like you think it's this perfunctory like end of the game, it doesn't matter, obviously they're up, but those, everybody in the stadium is drunk and going wild. And so yeah, it was, to kind of capture the attitude of what it would feel like to be in the stadium and actually react to the game as a fan took a little bit of work.
Any other questions for Max?
There was no Arduinos involved, but this has been one of my most favorite sector presentations ever.
You traitor to the Raspberry Pis and Arduinos, Dennis, but we'll let it pass.
Maybe some LEDs in that control pad, though.
Yeah, I can hook one up to one of these knobs, maybe.
I feel like when the online NFL, you know, the NFL is going to sell like access to the soundboard. Like, oh, do you want the soundboard for the game? You can have it for your holiday party. We've
I
got
thought
it available
exactly
now.
the same thing. Yeah, I hope they do.
Be awesome.
Fuck, with a big right antenna, you could probably do it yourself. Maybe you can use a Raspberry Pi, you know, since that seems to be the go-to. Pi to an SDR. Actually, like one of these.
There we go.
One
All
of
right.
these.
I've got a very quick demonstration here. This is one of those. It's a 1,000 watt. It's hard to see because it's upside down now, but it's a 1,000 watt induction heater board. There we go. And they're on Amazon and eBay for like $40. And it comes with this copper coil. It does not come with a fan unless you buy the fancier version, and it doesn't come with a water pump. But the idea is that rather than heating something with like a blowtorch, you can heat something just using electricity. And so this coil here is resonating probably fairly low, maybe a kilohertz or two, and it's just dumping a buttload of power in there. So it's all low voltage DC. It's running off 48 volts at max of 7 amps. I need to get a 20 amp power supply to hit 1,000 watts with it. So it's like 350 watts right now. And then the water is to keep this coil from melting on accident, because the coil absorbs the heat off of whatever you put in there. So I've got just a piece of plain steel, and it's currently room temperature, so not hot at all. And I'm just gonna plug in my fan here, which is probably gonna make more noise down here. So this is running, and if I put this in, it's just going to basically heat up instantly. At least it should. We'll see it. There it goes. I don't know if you guys will be able. Yeah, you can see it on there.
Yeah. 10 seconds it was red.
Yeah, so it's like, you know, instantaneously hot. So I just dipped it in the water. But it's pretty cool. So there's a few applications for these. One, of course, is to make like a forge that's not running on fuel, so you can run it indoors. The more useful thing, in my opinion, for a small heater like this is to be able to heat up a bolt. So when you get a bolt stuck in like a casting or whatever, normally you have to get a torch and you have to heat up your bolt. And the problem is then you end up heating up your whole casting and all this other stuff around it. And so rather than doing that, you can use this induction heater to be able to instantaneously heat only the bolt. And by heating up the bolt, you're going to expand it. And then once you've got it expanded, you can let it cool back down again. And then it'll pull away from the casting. And when it does that, it should loosen up. And so you go from this thing being cold to then expanding and getting big. And then when you let it cool back down again, it'll break away the corrosion, and it should free the bolt from the housing or whatever else it's stuck in. If you had like a nut exposed, you could heat just the nut, and then it'll swallow the nut free from the bolt, things like that. So they sell these, of course, and the sold ones are like $600. This one being $40 has a lot of appeal. The coil is too big. So I need to wind a new coil that's smaller, but we've got a ton of magnet wire upstairs. So I'm going to try to make just a magnet wire coil and see if I can get that to work. That's quite a bit smaller. So that's my amazing induction heat demonstration. I literally have been meaning to get this thing out and play with it. Jeff Whitehouse had bought it and donated it. And so I wasn't sure if it was going to work or not, or if it had already been tested to failure. But it works fine. And like I said, I got to get a bigger power supply if I want to heat up stuff faster.
Chris, I have a bit of experience doing induction heaters.
Awesome.
Well, for Dynavap. So I've got some thick magnet wire that's perfect for it.
Oh, cool. That'd be awesome. Yeah, I know there's is it Litz wire, I think, is like a high frequency radio frequency wire. That the company that makes this is selling as like a softer wire, so it's easier to wrap basically. Because the magnet wire, you know, they sell these pre-configured coils, but if you had something that's weird shaped, then you can use this Litz wire to wrap it, and it's like a softer, easier to wrap thing. But I think for our purposes, if we needed to make a coil, we could just custom wrap the magnet wire because it's not that big a deal. But yeah, so
it is not hollow though.
Oh yeah, that's okay. As long as you don't heat it for too long, you won't melt the wire. But of course, the hazard is you get it too hot, and then it starts to melt things. But yeah, this coil here isn't really ideal for something this small, because the coil should be like like this big. It should just barely fit in. And this coil is way too big for this object. If we had a smaller coil, we could get it to higher temperatures, because right now we're wasting a ton of our energy by not coupling very effectively.
The magnetic field is one of those things that increases. It's like it's your cube or square as you get farther away, or some pretty significant drop as you get farther away, which means even a little bit's going to add up.
Yeah, no, it's coupling very, very, very poorly. So the other cool thing that we got is for $100, I bought a 5,000 watt induction heater system. Somebody had it on Craigslist. It's a cheese factory in Monroe who had bought a building, and the building had a bunch of equipment in it. And the company that had the building did a electric motor service and repair. And so they had a really bad Craigslist ad. It just said like pillar heater and then call for information. And like, that was literally it. And so I kind of looked it up and realized Pillar only makes induction heaters. And then I tried calling them and nobody answered. And I tried emailing, nobody answered. And then like 2 weeks later, they renewed the ad. And so I called them again. And then they finally got back to me. And I said, I don't know what this is. They sent me a picture, but you couldn't tell what anything was. They didn't have a model number or anything with it. So I just said, I'll give you $100. And they were like, okay, $100. Like, yeah, whatever. So I went and picked this thing up, and it's about the size of like a dorm room refrigerator, but it's like when Pillar sells it, it's like a $15,000 induction heater. We can debate whether or not it's worth that much money. They of course want $260 for the manual for it. But I opened it up today and was surprised to find the quantity and quality electrical components inside. So we may, for the first time ever, actually buy a manual. It kind of runs averse to everything that I know and love, but we might have to do it. So I already tried to get one for free. I got to call the company though next and see if we can get them to donate one, but they haven't been too receptive.
Was that PDS that you got it from?
No, it's like Wisconsin Cheese or something. I can't remember. They're in Monroe.
Okay.
But anywho, so hopefully we can use this thing as a bolt heater, because it'd be handy to be able to heat up stuff when stuff is stuck. And then the bigger one I'd like to be able to use in the welding shop as a more of a forge to be able to actually heat up metal. The interesting thing is normally to do heat treat and stuff, they run a real high frequency so that it only heats the surface of the metal rather than heating through, because you don't want to heat through the metal because it changes characteristics. It also makes things crack because it differentially cools, which is bad. So you want to get the outside really hot and then quench it, and then it's done. So in our case, if we want to heat something throughout, you actually can run lower frequencies. And regular variable frequency drives run at 400 hertz. And so the other thing I want to try is just, if I take a regular off-the-shelf motor variable frequency drive, can I hook that up to a coil and just run, a 5,000 watt variable frequency drive into a coil and let it heat things? And there appears to be one company on eBay selling a VFD as an induction heater. So I am tempted to try it because we have some VFDs kind of laying around. But a VFD is like $80. So there can certainly appeal on a price perspective to be able to do that. It's a lot easier than otherwise. So they're also not water cooled, and there's a lot of things that are complicated on this heater that we've got. So anyway, we'll have to play around with it and see what we can come up with. But yeah, anybody have anything else they wanted to share? Or?
Actually, kind of related to that, at one of the last, I guess it would be the last, like Milwaukee Maker Faire, they had not an induction heater, but they had something that was like crushing coins by dumping a magnetic field. You had like a little metal piece, and you dumped a current through it, which induced a giant magnetic field. It sounded like a gunshot every time it went off, which was fun for me because I was over at the Lego. And it's like every couple of minutes, it'd be like, oh shit, there it goes again.
Yeah, I can't remember what that effect is called, but the other one is you can shrink pop cans in the middle. So you can crush a can without touching it. The same thing, you dump a massive amount of energy into a coil and you can shrink stuff. But the coin shrinkers are really cool. It's like a miniature quarter. So the quarter turns into like a dime size, but it looks just like a quarter. It's just a really strange looking thing.
Because you're applying, essentially force from not quite all directions, but pretty close to it, or all sides at the same time.
Anybody else?
So this size of induction heater, what would it be used for, if not for what you were not for heating up bolts?
really the most
Yesterday.
familiar thing people are to like induction heater, which isn't really a heater, is like your toothbrush charger, or like Bob's talking about a very precisely controlled heater, in that case for like tobacco products. But other than that, there's not really a lot of applications for these besides like heating bolts and stuff. They are used really frequently in factory assembly lines. So this is kind of one of those technologies that used to be really expensive, and with modern switch mode electronics is turning into a thing that like, well, if you really want an induction heater, you can just put an induction heater together. And it's the same way on your stove cooktops are the same setup. Where, yeah, if you want to heat just the pan, and the reason it heats so much faster is because it's heating the pan, not the bottom of the pan or the surface of the pan, but the core of the iron pan in the bottom. The only bad thing about induction is that it doesn't couple very well to non-ferrous materials. So you're a lot less efficient to heat like aluminum or copper or things like that, but it still works. It just takes longer to run.
So this wouldn't be for jewelry makers.
Very much. You could use this for jewelry making. Yeah, for
Okay.
melting very small amounts, but this frequency is probably wrong. I bet your coupling at this is really terrible. But
Sure.
yeah, they definitely make for dental and jewelry applications very small induction heaters to be able to heat up and melt very small quantities of expensive materials. You
Cool.
get less oxidation. You can control the environment around it a lot more readily because you're heating just the material and not the crucible and everything else. Like Jansen just mentioned on the chat, you can the other one is like machine tool, like a mill cutter for the milling machine. They have interference fit tooling where you have your collet and you heat it up with an induction heater, and then you drop the tool into it and the collet shrinks and grabs onto the tool. And it makes a perfect fit that has like perfect concentricity because there's no other forces on it. It just is shrunk in and grabbed on. So there's shrink fit tooling would be the other time you'd see something that's this size. But typically the systems are quite a bit bigger because the magic of induction is that you can heat really rapidly. And in order to heat really rapidly, you want way more power than you really want to use so that you can just dump a huge amount of energy and heat the edges of the surface or whatever area you're trying to heat up without heating the rest of it. But in our application, we don't care. We just want to heat the whole thing. And so there's a lot fewer constraints to do that type of heating. So yeah, if that makes sense. But yeah, I guess your toothbrush could be a glorified induction heater, just a really, really, really small one, very tiny.
Something for a MacGyver episode.
Yeah, exactly.
Not
Yeah.
room.
Quick MacGyver, we need to couple energy through this wall, just very small amount of energy.
Well, I think you just cut through a door because it's MacGyver. You know,
That's true.
you know, it's not going to be completely realistic, so you might as well, you know.
If you have 400 or 500 induction toothbrush chargers, you can put them all together and melt the doorknob quickly.
It'd be
It's like
something
buying
for
all the
Midwest.
fire detectors to make some nuclear thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I've made a nuclear reactor out of 500 smoke alarms. Actually, no, someone actually did that. It was a Boy Scout who did that in his basement.
He
Had
got
to-
on a list because he bought so many of them. They had to come visit and see what he's doing with it.
Yeah, it's not that hard to get. It's not that hard to get on those lists.
It's not intended to be a challenge.
You guys are all going to get me on a list.
Oh, come on. You're probably on all the lists.
I'm on a lot of lists. We used to joke about who was going to be the FBI agent in the shop when we started. Like, who's the informant around here? There's got to be somebody.
I have to think about the books at the beginning. It's like either like technical stuff or like hacking, cybersecurity. Like, what the hell? They're gonna- I'll read like build your own drone. Like, huh.
All right. Anybody else have anything else they wanted to share?
Happy New Year to you all.
Yeah, we made it into the next year. So hopefully things will be on the up and up now with any luck.
We could just figure out how to get the vaccines out faster.
Let's not start that one or we're all going to be here for another 3 hours.
Yeah.
I've got nothing else to do. I only moved here like 6 months ago and don't have that many friends, so sure.
Well, if anybody needs anything, as always, let me know. Happy to help with stuff or whatever it is people need help with working on. So nice to catch everybody and glad to see everybody's alive. And if all else fails, be inspired by Shira to make more tofu in the world, I suppose.
Add that to the list of stuff to try.
Exactly. Just don't buy the soy milk machine, I think was the summary.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good night, everybody. Have a good one.
Bye.
Yeah.
Good night.